Master, will keeping this thing in the space be safe? It is quite toxic, Green asked. Never mind that, Grandpa Green, Zhao said. Call everyone over to drink some water. Only when you drink the spatial water will you have no fear of the poison. He turned away from the hut and walked towards the spring, with the crocodile skeleton obediently following 5 steps behind him, like a faithful dog. They stood next to the spring, not finding anything special about it. There seemed to be no changes. Zhao was somewhat puzzled. Meg went into the hut to get some cups, while Blockhead and Rockhead gathered the slaves. Meg passed around a few cups. Zhao took a sip of the water and found nothing strange about the taste. Then he walked towards the crocodile skeleton. After taking a drink of water himself, Green pulled Zhao back. Master, let me do it. Your body isn't strong enough. If the water doesn't work, I still have a chance to withstand the poison. You don't. Zhao thought about it, then he nodded his head. Green stood next to the crocodile skeleton, took a deep breath, and then held out his hand. They all looked on nervously as Green put his hand on the crocodile's skull. A few people unconsciously sucked in their breaths. Nothing. Green tried again and forcefully patted its bones, but evidently the water really did have a detoxifying effect. Master, it seems like the water is really effective. Green smiled. Zhao smiled back, then he walked beside the crocodile and touched him. The crocodile skeleton felt that it had been rewarded, like a dog being caressed by its owner, so it shook its big tail, almost hitting a slave. Zhao laughed while he rubbed the crocodile's skull. Stop swinging your tail. You know, big guy, you are very interesting. I think I will call you Alien. In his past life, there was a horror movie called Alien, and this crocodile skeleton was so strange and scary that he simply called him that. The big guy seemed to understand Zhao's words. It wagged its tail in joy, but this time it held back the shaking. It was like it was shaking his tail at the same time as trying not to shake it. Zhao patted its head, then said, I want you to go to the back of the hut, lie on your tummy and stay there. After it slowly moved behind the hut, Zhao turned to Green and asked, Grandpa Green, do you think we should catch some more undead? Green thought about it. That's a good idea. Ah, but although your space is big, can you fit so many undead? Zhao frowned. His space only totaled over 10 mu large. He couldn't let those undead roam around here, where the rest of the slaves also stayed. But there was nowhere else to place the undead. Zhao turned twice on the ground, until he remembered what the voice said. The space classified the undead as robotic objects. It wasn't a living thing. Since the space didn't consider that it was alive, wasn't it possible to put it in the barn? If that was really so, then he could bring more undead into the space. Maybe Zhao could pretend to be a summoner. Anyway, there was no point thinking about it if he didn't first test out the idea to see if it would be successful. With just a thought, the crocodile skeleton behind the hut disappeared. Zhao immediately went to the front of the barn and touched the doors. The barn prompt opened, and there he could see a small icon of the crocodile's skull. Zhao couldn't help but laugh, then he turned to Green and said, Grandpa Green, rest assured, I can put these undead into my barn, so we can bring them into the space. That's wonderful, Green said. With these undead creatures, Master will be safer. If you were to wear a Midge's robe, then you could move around the continent and pretend to be a summoner. There's no doubt that no one on the continent would be able to realize that it's you, because you drank the water of nothingness. Zhao nodded. That's good, Grandpa Green. Let's go grab some undead. Once we catch more, we could put them in the perimeter of the Black Waste, so that whoever comes will think that the undead spirit beasts weren't gone yet. This would be an added measure of security. Hearing what Zhao said, Green's eyes lit up. Master, could we take in some, spirit beasts that are actually alive? Zhao shook his head. Those spirit beasts aren't the same as undead ones. The space see the undead as objects. If they were alive, I couldn't put them in the barn. I can't hold those spirit beasts in the space. Green nodded. He knew that he was being too greedy. Undead spirit beasts were good enough. In fact, even though Zhao didn't say it, he knew that his level and his money wasn't enough to open a pasture. If he could open a ranch, then he could rein in those spirit beasts. But now he could only use the farm for farming. Zhao then turned to Mirin and said, Grandma Mirin, first move the slaves to a safe place. When we catch the undead, I fear that they might hurt them. I'll tell Daisy and Anne to move them to the oil fruit field, Mirin said. Zhao nodded, then he walked to the hut, until he suddenly noticed that there were 2 bottles under the hut's window. These 2 bottles looked very ordinary. In his past life, people wouldn't pay attention to them. If you were to see them on the street, you would just kick them aside. But Zhao looked determinedly at these 2 bottles. One of them was white, while the other was blue. And they had the words pesticide and herbicide written on them. They were written with Chinese characters, so Green didn't know what they meant. Of course, Zhao knew, and that was when he finally realized what the space meant when it said that it was extracting the toxins to enhance the spatial toxic compounds. Originally, Zhao didn't know the meaning of that sentence because he didn't remember that the space had toxic compounds. But when he saw these 2 bottles, he realized that this was what it was. Yes, the spatial herbicide and pesticide were indeed toxic. In his past life, many people wouldn't eat vegetables that were grown with the help of these things because they were afraid that they might be poisoned. Zhao picked up the bottle of pesticide. This time there was no tone chiming, but the information went directly into his head. Pesticides. Toxic compounds. Can kill pests. Unlimited dosage. Toxic strength can be adjusted. Zhao understood that this pesticide wasn't that different from the original. The only change was that he could now adjust the strength of the toxin. After Zhao put down the pesticide, he picked up the herbicide, and the results were similar. Zhao was very satisfied of how the space could be upgraded in various ways. As long as it keeps leveling up, he believed that there was no expert in the world he had to be afraid of. Everyone was looking at Zhao with puzzlement, not knowing what he was doing. Master, what are those 2 bottles for? Mirin asked. Zhao smiled. There is poison inside these bottles. One bottle could kill the insects that eat the crops, while the other could kill the weeds that grow on the ground. Mirin and everyone else didn't know that these 2 bottles could be so useful. In the continent, although there were a lot of alchemists, because of their important status, they generally didn't pay attention to agriculture, so they didn't design any herbicidal or insecticidal poisons. This was the first time Mirin had heard that such things existed. Green instantly understood what the bottles could mean. Master, can these 2 things be taken out of the space? Yes, of course. Zhao nodded. And the amount you can use has no limit. Great. With these 2 bottles, the future crops outside will have no pests that we'll have to worry about.